You're listening to the Untold Stories, exclusive dark historical horror from the Appalachian Archives. Subscribe and ring the bell to keep the names from fading. In the winter thaw of 1892, a fog came that didn't lift. It pooled along the wagon ruts and the creek bed like milk left out too long. It touched the clapboard houses of Caldwell Hollow and made the paint pucker. Folks said the fog had a smell. Like coal dust, like damp wool, like a cellar where hymns had been stored and gone sour. Before the spring, 3 names would vanish from the church ledger. Before the thaw, a bell would ring without a rope to pull. And before the last snow melted in the laurel thickets, the earth would take a breath beneath the hollow. And remember what the living tried to forget. Caldwell Hollow lay inside a valley that felt cut with a dull knife. 2 ridges sloped down in a tired way, catching the clouds and holding them. On clear mornings you could see as far as the tree line where the birch bark peeled like old letters. But clear mornings were rare. Most days, the valley wore a veil of coal smoke from the Mercy Pit that was the mine hanging low and mean over the rooftops. Chickens coughed. Men coughed. Even the river seemed to cough when it hit the rocks. There were sounds that belonged to the place. Mule chains. Boot heels tamping down cinders. Saws biting into green timber for the company. A tin cup rattling on a nail in a kitchen that never warmed all the way. And always from up the slope, the slow rattle of the coal cars edging toward daylight. A music of iron that made supper spoons tremble in the bowls. They'd built the town too quickly. The way a man builds a fire when rain is coming. One main street. A grocer with sacks of flour that tasted faintly of lamp oil. A boarding house with beds full of miners who talked to themselves in sleep. A barber shop with cracked glass that showed your face doubled thin as a shroud. Then the church, whitewashed once and already peeling, its steeple leaning slightly as if it had remembered something and wished to whisper it to the road. The church had a bell. The bell had a rope, rough, greasy, knotted where boys had climbed it to prove themselves men before they had to. There were Sundays the bell did not ring, and still people came because Reverend Josiah Meeks had a way of sending a man home with less air in him than before he knelt. He was a narrow figure, a coat that hung too long, eyes like the smoke in a hurricane lamp. When he preached, he did not look up. He looked down as if reading from a page laid upon the bones beneath the floor. They said the Reverend had come through the mountains alone in '87 and carried with him a small trunk and a ledger wrapped in oilcloth. Some nights the lamplight in the parsonage burned past midnight, and voices carried one voice only, his answering a silence no one else could hear. He preached of mercy. He preached of debt. The way he said debt made it sound heavier than sin. Across from the church, just at the crook of the road where the saplings wore coal dust like morning crepe, lived Elias Wren, undertaker and keeper of the town's records. He had hands that looked clean when they were not, and a whistle he never finished. Folks trusted Elias because he was quiet and exact. He could write a name as if carving it into water and make it stay. The little house where he lived had a cellar with a door that swelled when it rained. If a man was lost down the mine and brought up again, Elias would measure him before he said a prayer. His daughter, Clara Wren, moved like a person the air could not touch. 17 and pale, with a ribbon that never held, she was known to sit on the stoop and stare at the ridgeline where crows perched like black stitches. The widows loved her because she never stepped heavy near a closed door. Children kept their voices low when she passed. As if she were a lantern with a small flame, they wanted not to blow out Dot in the boarding house up on the second hill. Jonas Pike slept in a corner bed with his boots under the frame and a flask tucked into the straw tick. He was a foreman. He had seen men go under and come out with their eyes full of coal light like fish pulled too fast from deep water. Jonas didn't talk, except when he drank. Then he talked fast, as if hurrying past certain words to keep them from sticking. He had a scar behind his ear where the rock gave him a warning once and he didn't learn. Caldwell Hollow had the look of a place that expected to be temporary. And that might have saved it, had it not decided to stay. The Mercy Pit wasn't named for kindness. They called it that because the first time the dynamite snapped wrong and threw a man Harlan Atwell into a black seam. He lay down there moaning a while, and when it went quiet, a boy said, "Mercy," the way you do when your stomach turns. The name stuck. The company men claimed it in their ledgers as if they had invented the word. Men went down by lamplight and came up by guesswork. The shaft timbering was good enough until it wasn't. Mules knew the tunnels better than any man. When one refused a turn, you listened. Still, every Sunday, Reverend Meeks would touch the miner's hands at the doorway and say, "We do not bargain with the dark." He said it like a reminder. He said it like a man counting dot. There was a smell that winter. You could miss it if you kept busy. A sourness in the fog that hung at ankle height and found its way under thresholds. Mothers scrubbed floors with lye and ash and could not lift it. Elias Wren, who knew the catalog of smells that attend the dead, took his pipe outside more often and did not light it. He would stand at the gatepost and breathe with his mouth closed. Clara watched him. She began to keep the windows latched even when the stove knocked and rattled for air. The schoolteacher, a woman called Miss Eliza Rowan, wrote a letter to her sister in Greenbrier in early February. The letter was never sent. It remained folded in a primer long after the schoolhouse burned. The paper browned to the color of tea. The ink sunk deep where the nib caught. What remains is this: evidence. Letter fragment, February 9, 1892. They tell me the fog is nothing. I have known fog from the James River to the Monongahela. This one does not behave. It does not thin when the sun comes. It climbs the steps like a dog. It listens at the keyholes. I find the children whispering words they do not know. By February's middle, a quiet grudge had settled between the mine and the town. The winter shift paid poorly due to stoppages. The company store gave credit poorly due to conditions. A man could hock his own wedding shirt and still be told he owed. Reverend Meeks held meetings where he prayed in a way that sounded like reading aloud a contract. He let the bell hang silent. People began to mark time by the shift whistle instead in the evenings. Men played cards on a barrel in the boarding house and folded their hands quick when Clara passed the doorway. Because she had a way of seeing through the slats of time. She would set a loaf on the sill and turn her face so the lamplight did not strike her full. Jonas Pike chased a losing hand into the night and then out again. He won back nothing but a cold that settled at the hinge of his jaw and made his words click. There was talk, there is always talk. About graves. About how, before the church went up, burials were made deep in the low meadow near the Mercy Pit's first adit, because the ground kept easiest there, frost or no. About a storm that blew the markers away. About the company staking out a coal seam just where someone's boy lay. This was not said loudly. You could hear it in the way women's voices fell when the mine whistle sounded. You could see it in the way Reverend Meeks rubbed his knuckles raw with lye. Elias Wren kept the town ledger. Every birth, every debt, every burial. He wrote the names careful, with the small, dry flourish at the end that was his alone, and he underlined the date once, never twice. The ledger was a flat brown book, the kind that likes to be touched by clean hands. Clara dusted it with a cloth Thursday evenings before she turned down the lamp. She did not open it. She would hear her father's footsteps in the cellar below. Count them. Listen for the whistle that never reached its end. One night in late February, snow returned with a mind to say what the fog would not. It came hard and fast, and then soft and blinding. The mine closed for a day. In that sudden quiet, you could hear creaks that did not belong to wood alone. Houses shift when snow lays heavy, that is true. But on Sycamore Street, where the boards had seasoned, a new sound joined, a low, even hum that had no source and no charity. It came through the floorboards and met the feet of anyone who stood upon them. A thrum, like a plucked wire. Clara woke. She went to the front room with a shawl drawn close. She set her palm flat to the floor and felt it. A breath, almost. She stood as if at a sickbed and waited for it to rise and fall again. When it did, she looked at the door to the cellar and did not move. The hum passed. The storm settled. Clara went to the window and drew a circle in the frost with her sleeve. Down the street, the church steeple leaned farther than it had in the fall. The snow feathered along its spine. Morning came blunt as a shovel. The mine reopened. Jonas Pike stood at the shaft mouth and counted men with his eyes. He disliked doing it aloud where the number could be overheard. In that count was a shiver he could not attribute to cold. He poured whiskey in his coffee and said nothing. A mule balked and refused to turn under the second crossbeam. Jonas struck the bridle. The mule stood like stone. Miners exchanged looks, the quick kind that say, "Not today." But then they went all the same because wages were not a question a man could ask twice. Around noon, the fog rose and held. Thick as wool now it was. The hill became a rumor. The road lost its shoulder. Men coming up from the Mercy Pit studied their boots to see if they were still attached. Elias Wren stood at his gate and watched the fog climb his steps the way Miss Rowan had written it would. And he closed the door firm, as if shutting a book on a sentence that would finish itself later. That evening, Reverend Meeks paid a visit to Elias. No one saw him enter. But a neighbor saw him leave, the Reverend's coat almost blackened with damp. His hat pulled low, one hand pressed to the pocket where the oilcloth-wrapped ledger rode. He paused under the sycamore, as if listening to something under the ground that had called his name, and then shook his head once. Sharply, like a mule refusing to turn, after he left. Elias sat at the table with his ledger open. Clara poured tea that went cold without being drunk. The page glowed with lamplight, the way pages do when they are tired of containing their meanings. Elias held his pen over the paper and did not make a mark. He put the pen down. He turned the ledger toward Clara so she could see the last line written there. 3 names. Not crossed out. Not yet. Names of men alive, seen that morning at the shaft. A tremor in the ink where the nib had rested too long. He turned the book back and shut it like a door dot. In the days that followed, dreams came to the hollow. They came to the women first. Dreams of ladders descending into earth and of hands reaching up, black as suet, grasping with the learned patience of the buried. Dreams of bells ringing 6 times at dawn and 6 at dusk and once more at midnight. The men did not speak of their dreams. They came up from the mine with their eyelids rimed white with dust and their teeth set against a low music. They would not acknowledge. Evidence. Journal entry. Anonymous, found in trunk at Caldwell site, undated. Estimated late February 1892. My boy will not sleep. He cries and says the floor sings to him. We moved the bed to the kitchen, and it still sang. I burned sage, and it still sang. I told him it was the river, and he said no, the river does not know his name. Miss Rowan led the children in copywork. There is light, and there is dark. One boy, Avery Hawley, wrote instead, there is down, and there is deeper. She rapped the desk, but softly, because the boy's eyes had that wide lake look. She asked him where he'd learned the word deeper, and he said, from the ground. Miss Rowan took him by the hand and walked him to the door, and stood a long while looking at the road that led to the Mercy Pit. As if somewhere in it a sentence had been started wrong and could not be fixed. At night, Clara began to hear whistling under the floor. Very soft, a tune that almost came through. She stood with her ear pressed to the plank and felt the hum travel through her cheekbone into her jaw. She went to the cellar steps and lifted the latch. The door swelled, reluctant. She opened it anyway. The air that rose smelled of wet rope and old hymnals. She listened. The tune did not belong to her father. Elias had gone to the church to meet with the reverend, to speak of a matter in the ledger that could not rest until set down, they said. The tune came from below. Clara shut the door carefully, each hinge marked a slow heartbeat. There was an old story in the hollow, older than the church, about the ridge being hollow in places, though not for caves. About sinkholes that did not appear sudden, but grew the way sorrow grows, unnoticed until the floor of a life gave way. Men laughed at this and then checked their porches in the morning for a crack that had not been there before. Women moved the cradle away from the seam in the boards. Where cold air rose in a column you could feel if you held your hand above it. The company sent a man, Mr. Cray, in a coat that fit too well for the hollow and boots that sank to the ankle in the road's thawing ruts. He carried a notebook and used a pencil that never seemed to dull. He went to the mine. He went to the church. He went to Elias Wren's table and asked for the ledger and did not touch it when it was set before him. He asked questions that left a stain, as if his words were dipped in iron filings. He wrote down the answers without moving his mouth. He asked Clara whether she believed in curses. She said she believed in weight. His pencil paused in its confident work and then continued. He asked whether the ground had ever given back what it took. She said only in spring. He looked then at the cellar door and at the way the paint had bubbled there, as if something behind it breathed too warm. That same week, the fog climbed the church steps and lay flat as a shroud over the front pews. Reverend Meeks walked the aisle with his palms down, hovering like a dowser, and then he took a cloth and wiped the altar rail as if it had sweat. He prayed with his ledger open and his eyes shut. The bell did not ring. Still, people gathered, because you must put your body beside other bodies when the ground starts to choose. Reverend Meeks read from Romans, and his voice had the tired iron in it that meant we are saying this together, though I am speaking it alone. He reached the words, "The wages of sin is death," and he paused until the church itself seemed to finish the sentence, wood to wood, nail to nail. Then he said, quiet as a hand over a mouth, "But the debt remains." Folks looked at each other without moving their heads. Debt, again. Always debt. The word fell like a small stone into a well. After the service, Elias Wren waited until the last man left, then set the town ledger on the altar where God might see it if he cared to. Reverend Meeks did the same with his oilcloth book. 2 ledgers on old wood. 2 mirrors that did not show the same face, Elias said. 3 names, Meeks said. 3 bells. Elias said, "The rope is cut." Meeks said, "Then something else has hands." Clara waited at home, hands in her lap, counting the hums as they rose and fell through the floor. She kept time the way a person keeps time at a bedside. She thought of Miss Rowan's letter she had never seen, and of Jonas Pike's scar, and of the mule that refused to turn. She thought of names written neatly and underlined once. She knew what underlined twice meant without ever having seen it done. That night, a wind ran the ridge and made the trees shiver out a sound like paper being torn. The fog moved, not away but aside, the way a curtain moves when a person slips behind it. The ground in Caldwell Hollow, where it had frozen and thawed and frozen again, loosened itself as if to test the strength of its seams. If a person had stood there with bare feet, they would have felt it, the subtlest settling, the suggestion of a breath taken in the dark. Elias and the Reverend returned late. Their faces had the scrubbed look of men who have washed in cold water and not dried. Elias sat. He pulled the ledger toward him. He lifted his pen. He wrote a date with careful hand, February 28, 1892. He did not write the names. He looked at Clara as if looking at a shutter that might, of its own will, blow open. Then he shut the ledger and put it away. Clara went to bed with the hum still working through the joists. She dreamed of the church bell laid on the ground like a mouth in the dirt. In the dream, it filled with water. When she woke, her pillow felt damp and her hands smelled like brass. Evidence. Witness statement, recorded by county surveyor. Transcribed 1907. Speaker unidentified, believed to be Mrs. D. Hawley. You want to know when it started? It started when the Reverend stopped saying Amen at the end. He would leave it open. I told my husband that is an invitation. He said to who? I said to whatever listens. He said nothing listens under the ground. I said then why does it answer when I walk? In the morning, Jonas Pike failed to come for breakfast. His boots still sat under the bed, one tilted wrong, as if a foot had left it in a hurry. The boarding house keeper, a widow with a mouth that pinched from secrets, stood in the doorway and wouldn't cross the sill. The room held a cold that had forgotten its season. On the table, a deck of cards lay with 3 turned face up. Not kings, not aces. Just 3 cards whose pips looked like eyes that had seen something and then blotted themselves out. The mine whistle blew. Men gathered. A mule shied at nothing, and then at something no one could see. Reverend Meeks walked past without touching the bell rope he knew lay spliced and useless. Elias Wren put his hand to the ledger in his coat and felt the weight of paper like a stone. He'd chosen to carry. The fog lifted finally that afternoon. Just enough to show the ridge line and the crows that had come in numbers larger than any harvest. They settled on the sycamore behind the church and looked down without comment. The air went still. Children turned their faces up as if rain might start. It did not rain. The ground shifted. Not much. Just enough to change the pitch of a porch step. Just enough to make a bored groan in a voice a man would later swear was his mother's. Just enough to mark a beginning. Caldwell Hollow had lived with death as one lies with weather. But that winter, something rose in the weather and tried the door. And the door, believing itself strong, forgot that some things knock from underneath. March came late to the Hollow. That year, the kind of March that drags its heels through mud and carries the smell of thawing things. The fog thinned but did not leave. It clung low over the Mercy Pit, thick as old breath. They said the mine had moods. Some mornings it sighed like a tired dog. Other days it hummed, deep and steady, as if remembering hymns the Reverend refused to finish. But on March 3rd, the Mercy Pit was silent, and silence in a mine is not mercy at all. At sunrise, Jonas Pike was still missing. His bunk lay unmade, his flask empty, his lamp gone. Men muttered that he'd walked out through the fog, gone to find work in Kentucky. But Clara Wren, standing at the window, saw tracks that led only toward the mine and ended where the mud turned black with coal dust. The day's shift went down at 7. 43 men, boots slick with thaw. Elias Wren watched from the ridge, the Reverend beside him, both still as fence posts. The shaft mouth yawned like something that had been waiting to swallow a question. At noon, the whistle blew once, not the 2 blasts for lunch. One long uncertain note that slid off into quiet. Then the ground stuttered. A noise like thunder underfoot, followed by a cough of dust that came from the pit and spread over the road in a single, dirty exhale. The Mercy Pit had caved. Inside, timbers folded like straw. Lamps shattered, throwing the dark against itself. The men screamed once, then twice, then learned not to because the dark swallowed sound faster than breath. When the rescuers came, they dug with hands and prayer. They found 3 men the first night, all alive, all half mad with thirst. They said Jonas Pike was with them until the second day. He'd gone deeper to fetch someone they couldn't recall who. Then he was gone. Evidence. Survivor testimony. Miter J. Nichols. He had the lamp. We told him leave it. He said it was calling to him. I asked who, and he said, Jonas, down here there's a light that ain't ours. Then the ground took him back. The Reverend led prayers at the shaft. his hands raw from digging. Elias stood nearby, counting quietly not men, but names. He kept the ledger under his arm. When a body came up, he opened it, wrote the name underlined once. 3 pages that day. The 4th he left blank. Asterisk, pause, rain fades, replaced by still air. That night, the bell rang 13 times. Caldwell Hollow wore mourning like a second skin. Black cloth in windows, women whispering psalms half-learned. The company sent wagons of bread, though no one ate. Reverend Meeks preached that the mountain was a jealous god, and the men nodded because they had no other gods left. Elias Wren spent his nights in the cellar, polishing his tools, though no one had died that week, not officially. Clara found him staring at a coffin lid as if expecting it to move. "Father," she said softly, "the ground hums again." He nodded once, slow. "It's breathing heavy now, as if it's near waking." She wanted to ask what was waking, but the question caught in her throat like dust. Later, she went to the church, found the Reverend alone, scrubbing the altar rail with lye. His knuckles were split open, bleeding pink into the soap. "Why did the bell ring?" she asked. He looked at her, tired. "It wasn't me, child." But something called the names. Evidence. Note found in Reverend Meek's ledger. March 5, 1892. "The pit is full, but the church is fuller. The earth and heaven wrestle for the same souls." By mid-March, men began to vanish in daylight. Not from the mine, from the streets. The widow Holly saw a figure at her fence post one evening, watching her hang wash. She called out, thinking at her brother. The figure turned, smiled, and its face was coal-black, features wrong, blurred, as if shaped from the very dust that hung in the air. When she blinked, it was gone and her laundry line was empty. Children whispered of voices in the creek calling their names. The water was cold, but the ripples moved without wind. 2 men, Samuel Dean and Matthew Cole, disappeared walking home from the company store. Their boots were found half a mile apart, both pointing toward the mercy pit. Elias Wren opened the ledger again. He wrote their names. The ink bled upward. That night, Clara dreamed of a ladder made of bones, reaching down into the mine. At its bottom, a door pulsed like a heartbeat. She heard whistling the same half-finished tune her father used to hum. When she woke, her hands were black with coal dust, though the house had no fire lit. On March 10th, a courier from Charleston arrived. A government man said he'd come to inspect the mine. Elias met him at the gate. The man asked about missing workers. Elias handed him a sealed envelope instead. Evidence. Letter from Elias Wren to State Surveyor, unsent. Recovered 1907. Sir, the mercy pit was not dug for coal. It was dug for penance. The Reverend called it a cleansing, but we buried too much. Stillborns, suicides, those not fit for consecrated ground. He said the Lord would not find them if we laid them deep enough. I believed him. We all did. But the ground is faithful. It keeps names better than we do. When the courier left, Elias told Clara to pack. We may go to Beckley. Leave before Easter. But by nightfall, his eyes had changed the kind of look a man gets when he knows leaving will not matter. That same night, the fog returned thicker than ever. And beneath the church, the floor began to buckle. Reverend Meeks woke to the sound of the bell, slow, deliberate, though the rope had been cut weeks before. He stumbled outside, the fog glowing white with moonlight. From the belfry came that same tune, one Elias used to whistle, the one that never found its end. He climbed the steps. Each rung trembled under his weight. When he reached the top, he found the bell swinging by itself gently, mournfully, and a smear of black dust along its lip. He leaned close, whispering, "Who calls?" The bell stopped. The air around him throbbed once, like the hollow chest of something vast beneath the ground. Morning came sickly gray. The miners gathered for roll call. Elias opened his ledger to mark attendance. But instead of ink, he found the pages soaked not with water, but with something darker. His handwriting twisted across the page, changing shape, the letters curling into names. He did not write. Clara looked over his shoulder. Each new name was written in his own hand. Each belonged to someone still standing in the yard, and beside everyone a date. The same date, March 17, 1892. Evidence. Ledger fragment, Caldwell Archive. Page 247. Jonas Pike returned. Samuel Dean returned. Matthew Cole returned. Returned. Not deceased, returned. That night, the fog rolled in one last time, thicker, blacker. The river stopped moving. The air smelled of coal, blood, and hymn smoke. From every house came whispers. From every cellar came breathing. Elias shut the ledger, pressed his palm to the cover, and said to no one, "Let it balance. Let the debt be paid." The next morning, the town awoke to movement in the fog. Figures walking down the main road, slow and steady, covered in soot, eyes blank and bright. Some recognized them husbands, sons, men lost to the cave-in. They did not speak. They only walked toward the church. The reverend tried to bar the door. The first figure reached him, placed a coal-black hand upon his chest, and whispered a word too deep for human throat. The reverend fell backward, his eyes filling with dust. Clara saw it all from the parsonage window. She ran to find her father, but the house was empty. The ledger lay open on the table. Every name was now crossed out. Every name except one, Clara Wren. She closed the book and felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Slow and deep. At midnight, the bell rang once more 13 times. No rope, no wind. Only the weight of debt being settled. The next morning, Caldwell Hollow was silent. Chickens dead in their coops. Wells dry. No footprints in the mud, except those leading to the Mercy Pit. The mouth of the mine had collapsed again, sealing itself. A smooth mound of earth lay where it once yawned open. No smoke, no sound. Clara stood at the ridge and whispered her father's unfinished tune. The wind carried it back, this time completed. Narrator, soft final. The Mercy Pit had eaten its fill. And the hollow at last was hollow indeed. And beneath that stillness, the ground smiled as only the forgiven ever do. When the ground goes quiet after a taking, folks in the mountains listen harder. They think the hush means peace, but the hush is only the earth drawing breath before it speaks. And in Caldwell Hollow, 1892, the earth was about to speak in the voices of the lost. 3 days passed after the black parade. Smoke hung low over the ridge. No mules called. No hammer struck. Only the sound of the creek, trickling through the collapsed mouth of the Mercy Pit, carrying flecks of coal that shone like eyes. Clara Wren walked the main road barefoot. The houses were open to the wind, doors ajar. Chairs toppled, lamps guttered. Everywhere she went, the same smell clung. Iron, dust, and candle wax that had melted without a flame. Inside the church, she found the reverend's hat, crushed flat on the floor. The pews were damp. The hymnals were swollen with moisture. The ink blurred until all songs looked alike. Only the altar cloth remained clean, too clean. It had been washed in something that was not water. She called softly, "Father?" Her voice fell down through the floorboards like a coin in a well. And for a long moment she thought she heard it land on something soft. That night, in her father's cellar, Clara lit a candle and found a small tin box beneath the undertaker's bench. Inside were 5 bound pages, the journal of Elias Wren, written in a trembling hand that did not seem his own. Evidence. Elias Wren Journal, March 18th to 21st. 1892. The Reverend says the dead do not sleep in consecrated ground when the ground itself is guilty. He spoke of a pact made when the mine first opened, of bodies buried under false names to keep the company clean. We were all in it. Every man who signed the charter. I dug the first trench. I heard them whisper even then. Jonas Pike found the old shaft. He said he saw light below. I told him no light burns that deep. He said, then it's the Lord's lantern come for us. He went down whistling. If the earth calls the roll, it will not stop at the dead. Clara read until the candle burned short. At the bottom of the final page was a single line, written twice as if his hand had trembled over it. The pit was mercy once. Now it is memory. She looked toward the cellar door. The hum was back steady, low, alive. It was not coming from below anymore. It was coming through the boards, up into her chest. At dawn, Clara heard footsteps outside. From the fog came Miss Eliza Rowan, the schoolteacher, gray-faced, clothes torn, eyes unfocused. She carried a satchel and nothing else. I walked out of the mine, she whispered. Clara said softly, there's no path left. Miss Rowan nodded, almost smiling. Then I must have walked somewhere else. Inside the satchel were papers, the Reverend's own sermons, rewritten by another hand. The ink was rusty, the margins filled with notes. Debt made flesh. Mercy is a tunnel, not a prayer. Do not speak the names aloud. Miss Rowan trembled. I heard them teaching the children below. They were learning our names backward. Then she began to hum Jonas Pike's half-finished tune. Clara stopped her with a touch to the wrist. But the teacher's skin was cold and slick, as if she'd been underwater too long. That night the house talked, not in words, no. The boards creaked syllables older than prayer. Clara sat by the hearth with her father's ledger open, though she had sworn not to look again. Each page now bore faint indentations, pressed from beneath, like knuckles trying to write their way out. She traced one with her fingertip and felt warmth. A pulse. Then came the voices, not from the cellar this time, but from the chimney. Soft, layered, many. Some spoke her name. Others only repeated, remember. The candle went out. In the dark, something small brushed her ankle. She struck a match. There was nothing there but soot, shaped like a handprint. Asterisk evidence. Clara Wren diary fragment. I fear the ground has learned speech. The air in the house tastes like pennies. I think the Reverend tried to teach it silence, and it learned instead how to pray. Determined to find her father, Clara followed the creek bed to the pit. The landslide had sealed it, but the ground still breathed, in and out, as if through unseen ribs. Near the base of the ridge, she found a fissure wide enough to crawl through, timbers embedded, like teeth. She struck a lantern and went in. The tunnel sloped downward. The air grew thick, warm and wet. Around her, the coal seams glittered, not black but red, as if the rock itself bled light. Then she saw carvings, crosses, dates, and words she did not know, names scratched by shaking hands. Her father's handwriting among them. At the tunnel's end, the passage opened into a chamber lit by no flame she could see. Rows of coffins stood upright along the walls, lids cracked, earth spilling out. On each lid was painted a single number, counting downward from 13 to 1. Only one stood open. Asterisk. Inside lay Jonas Pike, eyes closed, lips moving around a whistle she could not hear. The tune was the same. When she leaned closer, he whispered, we're all in the ledger now. The lids around her began to rattle. The hum rose to a choir. Clara dropped the lantern. Darkness folded around her like a closing book. When she awoke, she was not alone. The Reverend sat beside her, his face gray with dust, eyes filmed. He spoke without breath. I kept the book so heaven wouldn't, he said. We buried them to spare them judgment, but judgment came to us instead. He pressed something into her hand, a scrap of parchment, torn from his ledger. On it were 7 words, mercy is paid in full at depth. Then he smiled, a thin, weary thing, and crumbled to ash that smelled of coal and myrrh. Clara climbed back toward daylight. Behind her, the humming lessened, replaced by a slow, rhythmic pounding heartbeats of the mountain itself. At the fissure's mouth she paused. Turning back, the chamber's faint red glow pulsed once, like a final breath, then dimmed. She emerged into night. The fog had lifted at last, revealing the stars cold, indifferent, watching. But the valley below was wrong. Where the church had stood was now a shallow sink, smooth as glass, steam rising from cracks that whispered her name in reverse. She opened the reverend's parchment one last time. The words had changed. They now read, "The debt endures in the daughter." Recovered document. County Archive 1907. Fragments of a ledger, burnt around the edges, were found within the Caldwell Hollow site. A single entry, legible beneath layers of ash, reads, "Clara Wren pending. No further records of the town exist. Some places keep their dead in the ground. Caldwell Hollow keeps them in the air. The stone, the slow beating of the hills. And when you walk there now, if you breathe deep, you might hear the coal seam hum your name back to you in the voice of someone who never left. The voices below did not fade. They learned to whisper through the living. Night came with a different weight. It pressed on Caldwell Hollow like a second sky, closer than clouds, close as a hand over a mouth. The fog had gone, yes, but in its place, the dark stood up and paid attention. Nothing moved. Not the crows. Not the river. Only the ground breathed, slow and patient, like an animal that has found the wounded thing it means to keep. 13 coffins stood down there, counting backward to 1. The church had slid into a shallow sink as smooth as a sealed eye. The reverend had turned to ash in Clara's palm. And the ledger, her father's ledger, now held a single unfinished name. The reckoning, when it finally came, did not thunder. It whispered. It wrote. It listened for an answer. Clara Wren sat alone at her table with the book that had made and unmade the town. The lamp was turned low. The flame-thin needle straight did not waver, though she could feel a draft on her face where no window stood open. She laid a finger on the cover, feeling the small scars the leather had grown from years of being held by clean hands after dirty work. The cover was warm. That was wrong. She opened to the place the pages most wanted to go. Names, dates, a neat underline for each. A line that said, "Here was a life. Here it is kept." But then beneath the tidy order, a second hand had worked its will. Indentations rising from the paper, as if pressed from below by a blind stylus. The indentations formed letters not truly seen. Moreso felt through the pad of the finger, a script that wrote backward, as if the earth-faithful clerk that it is preferred its accounts read from the bottom up. At the very bottom of the page, a half-made entry waited. Clara, the last letters shivered, as if some small tremor had brushed them. The lamp's thin flame stretched toward the book and did not bend back. It was not the air that pulled the light. It was the ledger. She shut it, not hard, but with the care reserved for the lids of the dead. Her hands would not warm. She felt that old house tremor again, the hum rising through the joists into bone. Beneath the hum, the faintest whistle, unlearned tune, unfinished. Father small. Clara lifted the book and stood. "All right," she said into the stillness, with the moderation of a person who has learned to address the air as if it can answer. "If there's an account to settle, let it be done before the lamp goes out." The road to the church had subsided into a shallow bowl, a slowed collapse. The steeple leaned and leaned until it seemed to rest its weight upon the starlight. Clara walked to its lip and peered down. Not a hole nor a lid, as the surveyors would later say. The ground had placed its hand over its mouth and held the last word there. She pressed a palm to the earth, warm, damp, breathing. When she lifted her hand, her skin bore the faint print of script, inky fine, reversed like a page pressed wet side down upon flesh. She raised the hand to the lamplight. The letters clung a moment longer, then sank into her skin and were gone. Clara stepped into the sink, testing each inch like a cautious mourner near an undermined grave. The soil held. At its center, where the altar would have stood had the church not slid, The ground sounded hollow underfoot, one tone, bell-like, dull at the edges, as if the earth were a cask and needed tapping. "Father," she said. Not loud. "I brought the book." The ground answered with a long exhale. A hairline crack rode the circle, from below. A cold so deep it felt wet breathed up and pressed her eyelashes together. She knelt and set the ledger at the seam. The seam widened. Courteous, like a door held just wide enough for a body to slip through without scraping cloth dot, she went down. No rope, no ladder. The earth moistened and inclined, and her feet found the way as easily as memory finds a name it has loved too long. The lamp glow rode the clay in a slow oval. The air sweetened strangely myrrh, coal, beeswax. The smell of a sanctified room turned cellar. The passage widened to an aisle. Here the coal had been cut high and smooth. The marks of men's hands in the seams, a formal script of effort. In that script, other letters were added, newer, tremoring, cut with a nail or a small blade. Dates that were days of death and days after. Names of babes with no surnames. Men with 2, women with none, each carved to keep. Each kept away. At the aisle's end, the chamber waited. She knew its shape from the dream, a circle. 13 coffin lids upright like sentinels, their numbers counting backward 13 to eye paint dark, still wet if touched. She would not touch. A hush within the hush lived in that room. It made the lamp flame narrow to a needle, as if the light itself were drawing breath with care. Her ears filled with the same, who knows what it is, tone of a vibrating glass. The open coffin, the one she'd seen, still kept Jonas Pike within. His eyes were shut, but the skin around them twitched, and his mouth where the little tune made its home moved in quarter notes. He was not dead. He was not wholly alive. He was. Entered on a page. "Jonas," Clara said, "because someone must. I've come to finish a thing." His lips formed one word on the draft between this air and the other, names. "Then I'll speak them," she answered. And she set the ledger on the packed earth. Not a sermon, no. A scrap of it, found later among the papers Miss Rowan had carried up in her ruined satchel. Written in a hand that had shortened under strain. Evidence. Reverend Josiah Meek's unfinished draft. "If the ground shall keep the names, we must ask the ground to keep us kindly. We did not bury as thieves, but as men afraid of God's arithmetic. Debt is not only coin. Debt is breath borrowed, light borrowed, years borrowed. Forgive us our debts," the prayer says, but we taught the earth to count. And what the earth learns, it keeps. Clara had not read these words, but she felt them, their shape, their posture in the room's posture. Her father's ledger was a mirror of the Reverend's book. 2 hands holding the same coal-hot coal on either side. Mirrors show truth in reverse. Mercy is paid in full at depth. The Reverend had said, and then the words had changed to "the debt endures in the daughter." Clara pinched the lamp wick down and then up. The flame steadied. "If the debt endures in me," she told the air, "it ends with me. Not 1 inch further." The chamber listened. 5. The counting the ledger opened to the page already soft from too much attention. The entries for the lost, the returned, shone faintly, as if drawn with iron water. Each one had an underline, drawn steady hand, her father's habit. Across the underline, faint scratchings, new marks pursued the line upward, pulling ink against gravity. Names untethering, seeking the air. Clara set a finger on the first. "Jonas Pike. Present," she said. The chamber answered. The coffin lids at 13 and 12 rattled once. Gentle as a yes, she set her finger to Samuel Dean. "Present." A stir in the ground, as if a crowd had shifted its weight all at once. Matthew Cole. Present. She did not read the rest. She knew them. Caldwell Hollow was not large. The ledger had memorized her. And she, who had been quiet all her life, began to speak in the slow, level tone of a clerk who means to finish before dawn. The roll call of a town that had learned a hard lesson too late. With each name spoken, A pressure lifted from the air so subtly that she felt it first in her teeth, a release of a held ache. With each present, the hum tuned toward something like harmony. With each present, the lamp's thin flame broadened, yellowing. As if given back its oxygen. After the 11th name, she faltered. The 12th was her father's, Elias Wren. Her mouth did not want to shape it. She feared that saying present would make him less so. Father, she said instead to the coffin at 2. If you are here, it's only because you came to carry what others could not. If you are elsewhere, it's because you finished your work. The lid of 2 did not rattle. The ground beneath it sighed, long and grateful, the sound someone makes when a weight is lifted from their chest. She understood. Her father had gone the way the Reverend's ash had gone. Not up, not down, through. She tried to smile and could not, so she lowered her head. And in that bow found the last of her dread loosen and fall like old hair. There remained she turned the page. At the bottom. The half-formed name waited. Clara, of a room hushed within its hush. Jonas, in his open cradle, opened his eyes and looked at her, and in that look was the plainest thing. A man asking a woman for permission to be written in pencil again, not chiseled. Who writes this last? She asked the earth. You or me? The ledger's pages lifted and settled as if a breeze had entered. No breeze, only breath. Not hers. Clara pulled the lamp close until its small heat hurt. She dipped the nib. She finished the word. Not in the line of death or debt, but in the margin, the place where notes are kept that alter how the sum is. Understood. Clara Wren witnessed. She underlined it once. She did not cross it. The ground will have what it is owed. But sometimes the account can be translated coins for grain, grain for light, light for names. Clara had offered a translation, not a sacrifice, a reckoning written true. The coffin settled. The hum resolved into a single tone, the kind the mountain holds in winter when the wind runs the spine of the ridge and uses it like a tuning fork. Jonas Pike's eyes cleared as a pond clears after a thrown rock sinks. The tune that had kept him turned inside his mouth, unwound, and left like a thread drawn from a seam. Can I go? He asked, speaking for the first time with breath that belonged wholly to him. You can, Clara said. But the road is different now. He nodded like a man who has been told rain will come and knows how to get under a lean-to. He stepped from the coffin and stood as if his bones remembered him all at once. He looked at the ledger, and something like shame crossed his face and then passed, replaced by the relief of a debt not forgiven, but accounted for. Other lids eased in their housings. 13-2, all shut. Not slammed. Not nailed. Rested. Clara blew carefully on the lamp. The flame leaned and held. The chamber had warmed. She could smell pine pitch and clove, the embalmer's cupboard that had been her father's kingdom clean. Sorrow sweet. From the far side of the circle. A small lean of shadow shaped itself like a man who had made a habit of standing near doors. Elias Wren? No, the shadow had no face, only posture, a listening. She bowed to it the way a daughter bows to what has kept a calm house. The shadow inclined, as if to say, the night's work is done, the way out always feels longer. She carried the ledger. Jonas carried the lamp. He did not speak. Men do not after such nights. Just before the fissure, where the passage narrows and the breath of the upper air begins to thread itself through the coal sweet, Jonas touched her sleeve. If it comes due again, he said, what then? Then someone will read, Clara answered. And someone will listen. He looked at her in a way that said, I am grateful and I am afraid, and these two weights make a man walk straighter. He raised the lamp and stepped aside to let her climb first. They emerged under a shocked sky and a ridgeline that seemed new cut. The sink where the church had been had filled an inch with clear water, glass smooth, reflecting the steeple that was no longer there. Stars swam in the basin like coins at a wish well. Go, Clara said, not looking at Jonas. Find the others. Find the teacher. Walk when the ground is quiet. He went, his steps the first true living sound Caldwell Hollow had heard in days. Clara remained. She knelt by the basin and set the ledger on her knees. A thin skim of moisture had formed on its cover, a dew of breath, not hers. With her sleeve she dried it, like a mother with a child come in from fog. A thing must be written to be kept. The earth keeps in stone. Men keep in paper. Between them, the truth goes on foot. Clara opened to a blank page and wrote the town as if alphabet were a spell to call a thing back. Whole, Caldwell Hollow, a valley between ridges that catch fog like netting. People, coal, timber, widows. Smells, lamp oil, lie, hymn smoke. Weather, mercy withheld. Ledgers, too. Debts, many. Forgiveness, not offered, but tallied until the numbers learned to be human. She wrote until the sky thinned from black to iron blue. She wrote the names of the children who had learned their letters on slates that ghosted with damp. She wrote the mothers whose hands cracked in winter and bled into bread dough. She wrote the men twice where they'd been counted wrong once. She wrote her father last, the way a story writes its true beginning at the end. When she finished, she closed the book and underlined the date once, neat as Elias had done, March 21st, 1892. The ground shifted under her knees, one gentle heave. The basin's water trembled and then settled itself, and the reflection of the stars steadied. Somewhere, a crow gave the single remark it keeps for dawn when there is nothing left to say. Caldwell Hollow woke. Not as a town wakes with kettles and voices and doors, no. It woke as a field wakes after flood. Quieter, simpler, fewer things where once there were many. Houses had sagged an inch closer to their foundations. The road had softened into a suggestion. The mine mouth had gone to grass with miraculous speed. As if a handful of green had been strewn in a lesson, the people who remained, some few, came out without speaking and stood at their thresholds. The way. One stands at the lip of a grave that did not take the right body. Jonas Pike stood among them, hat in his hands, eyes rimmed red but clear now. Miss Rowan stood with her satchel and a line of script at her temple, like a thin bruised letters that would not reveal themselves to any mirror. A widow whose sheets had been taken by a black-faced figure found them folded on her stoop, clean, smelling of iron and pine. Reverend Meeks. Only a scattering of ash beneath the sycamore, gray as dove feathers, charcoal soft. Clara knelt and gathered what she could into a church envelope. She wrote on it, Josiah settled, and tucked it into the ledger the way a pressed flower is saved, to insist that spring once was real. The bell? The bell had rolled, they would later say, to the edge of the basin, and now lay half buried in the bank like a jawbone. No rope, no clapper. Yet when the wind moved right across the lip of it, a tone sounded the amen the Reverend had denied the end of his sermons. It came late, but it came. Clara listened. The ground's hum had lightened to a mere habit, not a hunger. She felt the familiar ache behind her eyes that comes of having wept without tears. She lifted the ledger to her chest the way she had once lifted a sleeping cat. Then she stood and addressed the air. There will be no more secret burials, she said. There will be no more names hidden under coal. The dead will lie in their names, and their names will lie in daylight. The air took the words and kept them. By evening, 3 wagons rolled out, to Beckley, to Hinton, to the rumor of a better ridge. Some went, some stayed, some stood a long time and could not choose. Jonas came to Clara with his hat still in his hands as if it had grown there. Will you leave? He asked. I am the page the town wrote itself upon, she said. If I leave, the book tears where it's weakest. He looked down and then up again with a steadier gaze than she had ever seen in him. Then I'll stay on a while. See that the new graves are honest. She nodded once. The kind of benediction that has neither priest nor altar, but does the job better than either. Miss Rowan pressed a packet of papers on Clara. If you keep the ledger, I'll keep the school. even if there are only 3 children and 2 of them belong to the same mother. Clara smiled with only the corner of her mouth. Teach them to write their names until the ground knows them, too. The teacher's eyes softened. It already does. Night fell a second time. Not the heavy night of reckoning, but the ordinary kind that has room in it for a song from a window and the smell of stew. The basin reflected a small, tame moon. The bell in the bank gave one little answering tone and went quiet. Clara sat on her stoop and opened the ledger to a fresh page. She did not write a prayer. She wrote a schedule, Sabbath burials at noon, each name spoken twice, once by kin, once by neighbor. She wrote a law, no debt entered without the debtor present. She wrote a promise, if the earth must count, let it count us as we truly are, somewhere under the ground. The ribs of the mountain creaked and settled like an old house making itself comfortable. The reckoning did not end the town. It taught the town how to be counted without being consumed. 15 years after the reckoning. The valley looked healed, but scars grow roots. The maps called it. Caldwell Hollow, abandoned 1892. To the untrained eye it was only meadow and young birch. To the trained ear it was a held breath, and to those who came with measuring rods and shovels, the earth offered its own record, one written not in ink, but in remembering. In 1907, the state sent 3 men to chart the ridge. For a new rail spur, they carried fresh instruments, government coffee, and the sort of cheer that vanishes when the wind forgets to move. By dusk of the first day, 2 had gone quiet. The youngest, Walter Henson, wrote in his field book, Survey Log, May 4, 1907. Ground soft as meal, though dry weather 3 weeks. Each strike of the rod brings a sound, not echo, not hollow, more like breathing through a wall. Found a bell half buried. No rope, no clapper. Still rings when the wind shifts. They camped near the basin. At midnight, the compass needles began to spin and hold west toward the Mercy Pit. Walter went to check the line. He never returned. The others followed his prints to the basin's edge where water glowed faint as phosphorus. On the bank lay his notebook, open to a blank page that was damp and warm. When they touched it, a faint black script appeared. 1 letter at a time, present. That same year, in a town 10 miles north, a widow named Holly opened a boarding house. She was quiet, polite, and kept a book by the desk to record her guests. Every entry was neat. Every departure crossed out once. Travelers said she hummed, while she worked a tune that never quite ended. When asked where she'd come from, she said only, down the road that isn't there anymore. In 1911, after her death, a sheriff inventorying the property found a ledger hidden behind a false wall. Its first page read, Continuation Book CW. Each entry was dated, each underlined once, and at the bottom was a note in small, precise hand. All debts balanced in light. No one knew who CW had been, but the locals remembered a girl who spoke soft and looked as if she'd learned to listen to dirt. County Record Office, Charleston Accession Note, 1933. Item number 441. Contents unsorted. 1 ledger, damaged. Leather bound. 1 envelope marked, Josiah settled. Ash residue, unidentified. Pressed flour, star anise. Margins of ledger contain notations in multiple hands spanning 1890-1902. Final page blank, except for impression of writing beneath surface. Requires raking light to read. Under that light, the words showed themselves. If we must be counted, let it be by what we loved, not by what we owed. CWTHE archivist filed it under Regional Folklore, Appalachian Anomalies. He retired a year later, saying the sound of his pen scraping paper kept echoing long after he'd stopped. Writing. Children in Greenbrier County grew up with the tale of the counting ground. They said if you stood by the River on a windless night, and recited your own name twice. You'd hear it answered once more from below in a voice you didn't recognize, but that loved you anyway. Farmers spoke of fog that tasted of iron. Rail. Men spoke of tools singing on their own. Every generation invented a way to explain the humming that rose from the ground each Easter morning. They called it spring water, then gas, then wind, but the old women knew better. They called it remembrance. In 1954, a road crew grading Route 12 hit an old timber beam 8 feet down. When they pulled it free, the earth collapsed into a void that smelled of beeswax and iron. A single page rose with the dust and floated to the foreman's feet. We, the remaining of Caldwell Hollow, bear witness that no name is ever lost. We speak them once each spring, so the earth will remember. Kindly, the page disintegrated in his hands, leaving black dust that smelled of coal and myrrh. The crew filled the hole and moved the road 1/2 mile north. No one could explain why the ground there remained warm through winter. Today, nothing marks the hollow but a dip in the pines and a bell half visible. When the grass dies back, locals won't cut there. Hikers say their compasses twitch. Their names echo back with an extra syllable. The air smells faintly of wax and rain. Sometimes, on nights without moon, a soft whistling rides the valley. It starts and stops as if waiting for another to finish the tune. And if you listen close, you can hear a second sound beneath it, the slow turning of pages. No hand is holding. The earth is a careful bookkeeper. It remembers what we try to forget: our kindness, our failings, our debts, our songs. In Caldwell Hollow, the ledger was balanced at last, but the account remains open, as all living things remain open until the ground decides otherwise. If you ever stand on that quiet meadow and feel the soil breathe beneath your boots, don't run. Just whisper your name once for the living, once for the lost, and listen for the answer that comes from below. The ground never forgets a name once spoken into it.